Welcome to the OK Let's Learn podcast. This is two podcasts in one. One where we dive into great stories and great books that we read together. And the other is just on tons of different topics, on everything we can learn. My name is Kevin O'Keefe. So today, OK, let's learn all about plants. And yes, in 15 to 20 minutes, what we will do here is just give a broad understanding, the basic facts, what you need to know all about plants before you dive into each individual type of plant, what makes them important. And yes, it's a fascinating journey. It's so interesting. And too often, most people take plants for granted. So let's start off with first, right? When you think of a plant, what do you think of? Do you think of just that little kind of plant that you're just like making and you throw a seed in a little tiny Dixie cup and it grows? Or you've got plants that are house plants, they're inside, you look outside, right? You've got the trees, you've got the grass, you've got apple trees, orange trees, everything, right? Well, we see plants every day, but most of the time we don't actually think about how important they are and what really it is. So a plant is a living thing that's different from us because while we eat food, a plant makes its own food using sunlight, right? I say we, people and animals, we have to eat food, like I said, but plants, they don't go looking for food. Instead, they use the sunlight, they use water and air to literally make their own energy. Each and every green leaf is kind of like this tiny factory. It takes light from the sun, carbon dioxide from the air that we breathe out, and water from the soil and turns them into sugar inside its own little body. So, plants, they don't walk, they don't move around, but they're quietly turning light into life. Yes, sunlight into life. How many plants are there? Apparently, scientists think there's upwards of 400,000 different kinds, and they're broken down into flowering plants, cone-bearing plants, and spore plants. Overwhelmingly, 90% are flowering plants. And these are the ones that we all recognize, right? The apple trees, the oranges, the roses, sunflowers, tomatoes, pumpkins, you name it. Those cone-bearing plants, they're the pine trees, a lot of the evergreens, spruce trees, the firs trees, the Christmas trees, right? And 4% are what we call spore plants that are actually like the moss that are sitting on the barks of trees and ferns, actually ferns. Now, when you're talking about the life cycle of a plant, it ultimately begins with the seed, right? That's where it starts. And a seed is basically like a baby plant, right? And inside this seed is the little baby embryo, its food supply, and the protective coating around the seed. Now, it's interesting when you think of a seed. Well, is that something that's alive? And the answer technically is yes. And what it is, it's kind of like it's hibernating. It's waiting to grow. It's dormant. So yes, under the right conditions, it will begin to grow because everything it needs to grow is right there inside the seeds. Now, when you think of seeds, some are large and some are small. That sesame seed that comes off the bagel, right? Really small. That acorn that's out in your yard is just so annoying. That's the seed of an oak tree. And that pit right in the middle of that avocado, right? Fairly large seed, and the largest is the coconut, right? And each of these are unique in their own way. So like I said, the seed needs the right conditions. Basically, the perfect amount of sunlight, the perfect amount of water, the perfect amount of temperature in the air, the warmth, and yeah, it needs room to grow ultimately. And so, yes, it does. The seed coat softens, the water soaks into the seed, and that baby plant starts waking up. The first root ends up pushing down into the soil, and then a tiny shoot pushes upward towards the light. This beginning stage is called germination. Once this becomes a reality, this baby plant is called a seedling. Why? Because it's just starting to grow. It's like it's a little tiny toddler, right? It's got small roots, it's got a thin stem, and it's got, yes, tiny leaves now. Think of that toddler as just starting to walk, it's just starting to talk, and off it goes. You see those first leaves, they start catching the sunlight, and yes, starting to make its own food. So it's off to the races. This new plant life stage is basically where the plant learns how to survive on its own. So let's dive into the parts of a plant, right? The roots, we all know about the roots. They hold the plant in place and they drink the water from the soil, and this takes in nutrients. You've got the plant stem. This is kind of like the plant's highway. It moves water up from the roots and food down into the leaves, right? The leaves, think of them as like solar panels on your roof. They're green because of something called chlorophyll. Chlorophyll captures sunlight and starts this process called photosynthesis, which we will dive into in a moment, right? Inside the leaf, the light mixes with the water and the air, and the plant makes sugar to survive. And while doing this, it actually, once it breathes in its carbon dioxide, which we breathe out, what does it release? What does it breathe out? It breathes out oxygen that, yes, we breathe in. So you talk about us and plants, we cannot live without each other. I mean, it's funny. You've got to think about this the next time you're looking at a tree falling down, a tree dying, cutting down a tree, just getting rid of that, the brush in your yard. And yeah, I get it. We all want our beautifully manicured lawns, but ultimately the wildlife around us, the trees, the plants, think about it. Every breath that we take was once inside the leaf of a plant. Everything I just explained is photosynthesis. The bottom line is plants grow, they make flowers, they build fruit and create seeds, which we will get into further. But this whole while that plants are making food for themselves, they release oxygen into the air. So like I said, every breath that we take, we can thank for the leaves on plants. This whole process with the plants making their own food, basically releasing oxygen out into the environment, this is known as photosynthesis. So let's continue on the journey of the life cycle of a plant. And now keep in mind that we could have a plant that, has a life of a week, of years, right? Trees, thousands of years, right? Your typical plants that are perennials that come back every year, right? Could be multiple years, and what we call annuals that may only be 1 year. You've heard these terms, and if you're into plants, you know them. But if you're not, you hear, oh yeah, we're going to go get some flowers for the spring, put around the pool, whatever it may be. That's a perennial. Oh, that's an annual. An annual plant lives for one growing season. So literally, in that time period, whatever it may be, 6 to 8 months, it sprouts from a seed, it grows, it makes flowers, and then, yes, it produces seeds and it dies, right? The next year, only the seeds come back, not the original plant. What are some examples of some of these plants, annuals? Well, there's sunflowers, there are marigolds, right? And a lot of vegetables like beans and lettuce. So, a perennial, yeah, it lives many years. It grows roots that stay alive under the ground. And you know what? It may lose leaves in the wintertime, but it comes back again each spring. Many of you have these in your yard. You say, oh, wow, it looks like it's dead. Well, it comes back. And yes, examples of these are roses, daisies, of course, multiple trees and shrubs, right? And ultimately, it's a plant that keeps living and growing year after year. So, what's next? Ultimately, it's the flower, right? We talk about flowering plants. Each of these plants have a flower, right? We can recognize a flower, but what's it doing there? Why is it, when does it come and why is it there? What does it do and why is it important, right? Well, it's just not for its looks. Inside every flower are the parts, keep this in mind, that help the plant make seeds, new seeds, right? So inside, it's got this powder that carries the plant's cells, which is pollen, and then it's got the part that can become seeds. So basically, its job, the flower's job, is to invite helpers to move pollen from one flower to another. Who are those helpers? We call them pollinators. And yes, they're the insects, they're birds, and yes, even mammals, even us, for Pete's sakes. But we associate pollinators, for the most part, as bees, right? Because the flowers can't move, so nature needs to help move the pollen from plant to plant so we could have new seeds which become new plants, right? So the bees, the butterflies, even beetles and hummingbirds, and even some bats, like I mentioned, right? When a bee lands on a flower, the pollen sticks to its body. And it's not there because it wants pollen. It's rubbing up there. Imagine the simple analogy is, I don't know, you've got your whole body is full of Velcro if you're a bee, right? And the pollen just ends up being attached to your whole body. But the bee is not there to be nice and, I'm going to get some pollen so we can make some new plants. No, it's after the nectar. I mean, this is a whole future episode. We're not getting into bees here, but nectar is this like sweet liquid that a flower makes. And of course, for a bee, that's its food, right? It's its fuel. It's a way for it to live because ultimately it drinks the nectar, right? And back at the hive, they turn the nectar into honey, which we all know, right? So that feeds the bee colonies. And yes, you hear about bees being so important for our environment, and that's because they are pollinators. They're making it so that plants can reproduce. Yes, that word reproduce, which basically means making and having new plant babies. So when we talk about, just fun fact, honey, you talk about something that you can eat thousands of years later. You have that expiration date on every food you get. You've got the fruits and vegetables that are just rotten in front of you. Honey, you find it in that jar up in the shelf years later. Yeah, it's still good. And since we're here with fun facts, pollination, this transfer that occurs, making new plants, right? Well, it allows the flower to begin making seeds, and 1 out of every 3 bites of food we eat depends on pollinators. So the next time you see that bee out in the yard, it's just annoying you and you end up getting stung by it, just try to look positively, because ultimately every time you see that one bee buzzing around you in the yard, annoying you, well, you're actually watching a farmer at work. So back to our flower. So listen, we've talked about the flowers, right? And we're talking about ultimately producing new seeds. But here's the thing that is so surprising that people don't realize. After pollination, the flower changes. The petals, you know this in spring, all of a sudden they start falling away. Just think of that tulip in spring. Not long after it's literally blossoming, it's disappearing, the petals, right? The part of the flower that holds the seeds now begins to grow bigger and rounder. That part of the flower becomes fruit. So when you eat an apple, you're actually eating the part of the flower that grew to protect the seeds inside. Think of that, right? We all eat that apple and we see the seeds inside. Well, that whole apple that you're eating and enjoying is actually, its job is to protect the seeds. The apple technically is not made for us. Like I said, it's made to protect the seeds. Now, check this out. It's so fascinating. This idea about us eating apples and enjoying it, yeah, it serves a purpose for us and for animals. But think about it. It's like an invitation. The reason it's so sweet and juicy and just so tasty, because it's basically inviting us to eat it. When we or animals eat the fruit, the seed ends up traveling to new places. And yeah, I'm not going into details here, but think about it. If it comes inside our body, it's got to come out, and it comes out somewhere else, especially with birds flying you don't know where across the planet. And you understand when we talk about seeds and them dispersing, which means moving out in all directions. You wonder why a species of plant that could begin in India end up years later growing on the other side of the world in maybe South America. That's because obviously we have the ability through nature, through animals, to have our seeds dispersed, right? Even those dandelion seeds are the easiest example of seeing how seeds disperse. We just pick up the dandelion with all the seeds there and we blow it. But ultimately, it's the wind that can do it. Water can have seeds disperse, obviously, with coconuts, seeds that float. So ultimately, our plants end up growing and moving from place to place and surviving because of nature and us helping out. So the apples, the tomatoes, the cucumbers, the peppers, right? They're all flowers. That's where they started off by ultimately finishing their job and turning them into the fruits that we know today, that we pick off the trees and we pick off the shelves in the supermarket. So in terms of the life cycle of plants, going from seed to seed, a seed lands, it germinates, a new plant grows, it makes leaves and roots, then it grows flowers. Pollinators move pollen to another flower. The flower ultimately becomes fruit. The fruit holds the seeds. And yeah, the seeds travel. And the cycle begins again and again, over and over. It goes from a seed to a plant to a flower to a fruit and back to a seed again. That's the life cycle of a flowering plant. So friends, thanks for staying with me on this journey. I hope you're looking at plants, flowering plants specifically, in a whole different light. We will have future episodes on a certain type of plant that you all know, the tree, and certainly going forward, we'll talk about the other type of plants that I mentioned when we can dive into those evergreens, those fir trees that certainly... I'm looking outside right now, and it's in the dead of winter, and I'm seeing those green leaves, those needles still hanging in there all through the winter. So, until next time, reach out to me at kevmok21@gmail.com. Questions, comments, requests for future episodes. It's always nice if you could subscribe, hit that check button in the top right-hand corner if you're on Apple Podcasts to subscribe. That way you get download it onto your phone every morning when you wake up, a new podcast episode. And of course, rating and reviewing the podcast always helps. I appreciate your time, and until next time, have fun and keep learning.